The Pediatric Lounge, a podcast taking you behind the door of the physician's lounge to get a deeper insight into just what docs are talking about today. From the clinically profound to the wonderfully routine and everything in between. Well, hello again to this week's episode of the Pediatric Lounge. With us, we have a friend of the lounge and fascinating physician, Dr. James Reilly, who is a partner at RBK Pediatrics in Long Island, an expert in what we will call metabolic disease of children, and board certified in management of lipid disorders. This will be one of 3 episodes where Dr. Reilly talks to us about the importance of labs, physical exams, and measuring different things in the child who is overweight to get his or her metabolic house in order to have a healthy lifestyle. Good morning, George. How are you this Tuesday morning?
Hi, Herb. It's Tuesday once again, elevating great physicians. And today we're going to bring Dr. James Reilly, a very old friend and one of the partners at RBK Pediatrics. We've been together since too long to count, from residency, 1996, right, Jim? 7, something like that.
The last century.
Oh, actually, 93, 94.
Good morning, Dr. Reilly. So glad to have you on the podcast today. Thanks for joining us.
Mm-hmm.
So we start always by asking people why a pediatrician and why a pediatrician specializing in obesity and lipids. How did you get here?
Yeah, so like a lot of people in this space, it starts like with a personal kind of story where, I became a general pediatrician and really that's what I thought I would always want to do because I love ear infections. Kid comes in ear infection, you give them amoxicillin, they go away, everyone's happy. But then as time went on, I started having issues in my life where like my wife ended up being very sick and she ended up getting a breast cancer. And even myself, like my dad had a stroke when he was 50 and I started having high cholesterol and I did all the things that people do where I was exercising and doing different things. And my poor baby was getting sicker and sicker. And we hired a nutritionist because it was recommended by a friend and it made a big difference in terms of her health. And, when you're a doc, you feel like you know everything. So I was kind of like, wow, this is good. Maybe there's something here. And I started reading about it and I just started falling down a hole because I just started realizing so many things that I had been taught and had been doing were perhaps not the best. And then it started to lead into why I, like over the course of my career, I'm starting to see so many kids heavy. And I really came to a realization that, we have these food providers that don't care about health. And then we have a whole generation of health providers that don't care about food. And and then everything started to change. And then once you start knowing, you have to share it with your patients. And then I decided to get my obesity specialization. And then I started worrying more about cholesterol and I became a clinical lipidologist. So
tell me, how do you become an obesity expert? Did you have to go back and do a fellowship? Or did you do it
so they have
online?
different fellowships that you can actually do a lot of this like going to conferences and doing independent training and things. So I don't have to actually train with someone, right?
Okay.
Which is very helpful because there's almost no pediatric anything, right? We're the orphans of the medical community, right? Yeah. And so a lot of it is just learning what the adult guys do and then trying to adjust everything to pediatrics.
Okay. And the lipid certification was the same way.
Oh my gosh, that was the worst. To tell you the truth, I was more proud of myself when I took those boards than I was on my pediatric boards because, to tell you the truth, the pediatric boards for me were fairly easy, but that one was just all adult medicine. And I had to learn stuff about blood pressure, all this kind of stuff were on the test. And I don't know any of that kind of stuff, right?
Nor do we want to know about it.
No.
Oh, that's fascinating.
I remember when Jim started doing this, some kind of an email about, was it 10 years ago, Jim?
Oh, it's been consuming my life, so it's hard
Yeah.
to say.
So I got an email about become an obesity specialist. And I looked at it. I said, wow, this is too hard. Jim, this looks like it's going to be very, very important. You should do this. So he became an obesity specialist.
He's very good at delegating the tough tasks to others, isn't he?
Yeah, George always says that to people. I don't even remember that at all. I mean, to tell you the truth, that I was already started. It's like even the medical home, when we did the medical home, I had already spent like 8,000 of his money when he realized there was such a thing as the medical home, right? Yeah. But it is like it is kind of like a good way to kind of get like a background on some of this kind of stuff, but you really don't have to do it, right? It really is, for pediatrics, your biggest impact is always when the kids are littler. And you already probably know the most impactful things, right?
So I have a question about BMIs and growth curves, because I see it in the exam room, and I don't know how to say this politely, but I'm Spanish speaking, so I can say it. So when you get the people from Central America, they're naturally shorter and more stocky than the Anglo-Saxon. And they're constantly on the wrong side of the curves for weight.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no adjusting for that. And it upsets the parents because sometimes they're not really truly obese. They just have a different body habitus. And I wonder what your thoughts are about that. We don't really have culturally appropriate growth curves.
I mean, there are Guatemalan growth charts specific for people of Central America.
Okay.
But you know, a lot of times that also falls into some of our workups, right? Because when I see a kid, for example, and they're 6 years old and they're going greater than the 95th percentile on the growth chart, a lot of times I'll take a look and see what's going on, and then I'll take a history, physical diagnosis. That's, you know, that's what we do, right? And if I see like in their bloods that their liver functions are elevated, I know there's something going on. And if I see their bloods look great, then I know that they're probably metabolically healthy, right? So it's very hard. So if you want to, if your plan is to reassure them because they're from Guatemala that they're healthy, I can't even tell that to anybody, right? So I usually have to do a little bit of a workup, and then I usually ask questions like, what are they eating, drinking, all that kind of stuff. And you'd be amazed, especially people when they first come to this country. Sometimes the advertising in other countries is very predatory, and they'll come into this country thinking that, you know, orange Gatorade is very healthy, and you know, that stuff will get you, right? So we have to do a lot of teaching.
Right. Yeah, I see it on second generation. So for example, the mom's American and the dad is from, I don't know, Honduras or Guatemala, native Mexican, and the daughter is just not a skinny white girl. And I'm like, well, she's never going to be a skinny white girl because dad is not a skinny white guy. You know, that's like trying to think that, you know, I was going to be 6'2" when my mom's 5 feet tall. That's just not going to happen. You know, it's just part of life. Anyhow, I wanted to know what you think about the screening for obesity in children and adolescents from the Preventive Service Task Force recommended statement.
Yeah, so, you know, it's an attempt by them to try to give guidelines to people so that way they can get an idea on how to help, you know, our obesity epidemic. But, you know, whenever they do a study like this, that's kind of, you know, 26 visits in a year. I mean, I don't know how many moms they know, but I don't think that they could fit in any more kind of stuff, especially seeing me, you know, 26 times in a year. I mean, geez, Louise, George has to see me every day, and it's already too much. You know what I mean? So it is the kind of thing that, you know, that's not going to be the answer. It's not, you know, the answer can't be where we're spending, you know, thousands of dollars on all these poor kids, right? But I think that the answer lies really with the pediatricians in realizing what the problem is. And it kind of goes also with what you were saying, that I really could care less how much a kid weighs. I mean, sometimes people, I think that they get to they get the idea, like when I see someone that I'm looking at the scale or whatever. The scales lie. All these things lie, right? I'm actually much more interested in what are they doing health-wise. Sometimes I almost forget to see if they lose weight. I mean, that just happened to me yesterday. I had seen a kid that I had seen a few times before, and the kid lost like 15 pounds in just like 2 months, right? And it was the kind of thing that you know I'm much more interested in. So since the last time we were here, we were talking, what kind of things have you made? And trying to build that change mentality, that so that way
So,
that these things can be, carried on after they're out of the room with me.
so this is fascinating because you're alluding to something that two of our previous guests have touched upon. It's that last step, the implementation step. Some of these studies ask us to do things that are impossible. There is no time to see a patient 26 times in a year. They don't want to do it, and we don't want to do it. We don't have time for it. So implementation is extremely important in
and and
coaching.
and literally my eyes were opened. I mean, this is a journey for me, right? So I went to one of these obesity medicine conferences in Boston, right? It was run by Harvard, right? And they go there and they talk about what they do, right? And I know what the AAP recommends, exercise physiologist, all this kind of stuff. And even at Harvard, they don't have enough money, and those guys have more money than anybody else, right?
Right.
To actually do what they actually say that we should all be doing. So in a way, they're kind of saying, well, you can't take care of obesity. But let me tell you, I don't have any of those things. I take care of obesity every single day, and we're very successful.
Wow. And so run me by first, what do you do how do you define an obese patient when you see one within your practice?
Yeah. So first of all, I don't actually call them obese, right?
Okay.
I don't like that because that sounds very, very negative, right?
Okay.
But yeah, so normally we actually will go through our charts, and we actually our EMR tracks anybody who has a higher BMI, and we will kind of reach out to those people and offer them what we call nutrition consults, where we'll just go after what's going on in their life. What are they eating? How are they sleeping? Are they exercising? All this kind of stuff. And really, these nutrition consults actually branch out to a lot of things, right? So even for other kind of health issues, because really a lot of the health issues are related to lifestyle. And then when we have an individual patient, it depends on the age of the patient. If they're
So
two,
so let me interrupt you for a second.
Mhm.
So let's say what your EMR uses the ICD-10 code above 95th percentile for
Yeah,
BMI. Is that what you're using as your screening?
it does.
Yes.
Okay. And then when you say nutritional consult, is that you, or do you have a nutritionist actually reach out to them?
No, that's me.
That's you.
We actually have also three other docs that do this. I mean, you know, it's actually grown, and patients actually request it, and we're constantly needing to add more people. But it is actually a huge problem.
And the nutritional consult is done through telemed or in person?
It can be either.
Okay. All right. And then after the nutritional consult you alluded to before, you like to see not just the weight, but you like to see the metabolic profile of the patient?
Yeah, so one of the lies that we were told was that these kids don't get adult problems, and they do. So I have 3-year-olds pre-diabetic. I have 3-year-olds non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. I have 14-year-olds that they have PCOS type symptoms. But we don't find it unless we look for it.
Okay.
And this is one of the things I don't like about these guidelines, is that they kind of discourage you from looking for diseases. And they kind of make these decisions like population health, but I don't see populations. I see patients, right? I see individuals, right? And I know better what to look for. So we look for these things and we find them. And luckily I work with great people like George, who they order these kind of tests that I need, and we find kids all the time, every single day, that are not metabolically healthy. And then that gives you a little bit more cachet, a little bit more buy-in from the parents when you can show them, look, this is why I'm torturing you, because your kid has liver problems. And if we don't make it go away, you're going to be in big trouble.
Yeah.
So,
With guidelines, guidelines, I think we lost sight of what guidelines are and what recommendations are. They're not the gold. I mean, it's not the law. I think they're just supposed to guide you. So they give you all these guidelines. It doesn't mean you have to follow every single step. So what we can try to do is you pick out what's practical, what you can actually do, and break it up into a daily routine, and then you go forward. But if you follow all 26 steps, it'll just forget about it. I'm not going to do it. It's like in college, read 600 pages by tomorrow. Not going to happen.
Well, I think guidelines were useful in critical care pathways were useful 20 years ago when I was involved in it, because we didn't have EMRs.
Right.
And so, on your asthma patient, you should send them home with an inhaled steroid. However, you're rushing through rounds and you forget to write for it, and they go home with beta 2s, but not the darn steroid inhaler, and they relapse next week.
Right.
And the only way to defeat that purpose back then was to have a pre-printed form with all the things that they're going to get at discharge, so I could just check them and sign it and move on to the next patient. Now the EMR can do that. You can have standard order sets for your discharge, and you don't have to worry about pathways.
You're correct. But what happens is you have so many steps that the steps get in the way of progress.
Yes.
And then if it gets in the way, the doctor will just shut down and just forget about it.
Yes. The other thing with guidelines is that they're made, they're sausage making. So you have a nurse, a dietitian, a hospital administrator, 2 pediatricians, an adult asthma specialist, an implementation specialist, a data scientist, a quality expert, and they all have an axe to grind. And so they'll add this or take that out, or the nursing staff will say, oh, that's too much work. We can't do that before the kid gets discharged. And it gets taken out because you can't convince that one constituency to come along on the program. And so it gets taken out of the critical care pathway or the guidelines. So you're correct. They serve some purpose, but they're not all great.
Right.
And so I'm a little curious as to what standard labs do you get when you think a child's in trouble weight-wise?
Yeah, so that's always hard to answer, right? So I actually do have a video on our YouTube website that talks about some of this kind of stuff, but it is, it depends on who I see, right?
Okay.
So, it's the kind of thing, for example, when I see a girl that's obese, I mean, a lot of times I'll struggle to help them to lose weight unless their hormones become normal. So I'll do something that a lot of pediatricians won't do. I'll do a check for their hormone, full hormone panel, and then you'd be surprised how many girls you see with elevated testosterone, things like that. I'm usually checking their fasting insulin, because if their fasting insulin is elevated, especially you bring up the Hispanic population, and yeah, yo puedo hablar español, so I see a lot of these guys, right? And it's the kind of thing that sometimes they'll have hemoglobinopathies that will actually cause their A1Cs to look actually normal, but their fasting insulin will be very elevated. And that will be, if you did a 2-hour glucose and insulin, you would see that they were actually already pre-diabetic and you didn't know. So yeah, you have to kind of do a little bit more investigation for some of these things. A lot of these kids, they'll have elevated the liver function test, because unfortunately that is a real problem for me among my Middle Eastern and Hispanic patients. So we usually do a full metabolic profile. Usually when they come to see me, I have to check them for thyroid at least once, just to make sure that's okay. A lot of the girls are already low in iron, and they've looked at that, where your metabolism drops if you're already low in iron. So we'll look at for iron. Yeah, it's very hard. There's not a cookie cutter kind of way of taking care of people.
You didn't mention vitamin D at all.
I check definitely vitamin D, because one of the things we see is that when the girls are very low in vitamin D, it's very hard for their hormones to be normal. And that's actually a very typical thing that we'll see, that their vitamin D is like 10, and we'll have to put them on 4,000 IUs of vitamin D a day.
Okay. My grandfather used to make us take a tablespoon of Scott's emulsion of cod liver oil after dinner. That has about, I think it's 1,500 units of vitamin D in it.
Hmm.
And that was a nightly routine after dinner my whole childhood. Um, but I think he was onto something. He knew that vitamin D was important and the omega oils for the kids to grow up healthy. Um,
No,
Very interesting.
I mean, to tell you the truth, omega-3 fatty acids for some of the kids who are very depressed and obese will actually see that their omega-3s are very low, and that causes inflammation in the body, and a lot of this kind of stuff can be triggered by inflammation. Yeah.
Wow. It doesn't taste very good.
So we have come along, and they do have different things, but usually what I say to people is that eating fish would be a good way to get your omega-3s and get some of this kind of stuff.
Yes, it's salmon tastes a lot better than Scott's, but um, and then you're really a clinician. It depends on what it is in front of you that you get a different panel. Does your
Uh,
pra- does your practice routinely screen for this metabolic? Some of the practices I cover every year where the kid is within the normal weight chart and growth chart, they get, a metabolic panel, lipid panel, a CBC, and a vitamin D. And I'm like, if a kid is normal and is growing right, why do we need to test it?
Yeah, so if they're normal, we don't check it, right? But it is recommended that you do a screen at 9 or 10, and then around 16. So we do those screens because there is such a thing as familial hypercholesterolemia, and 1 out of every 250 to 1 out of every 500 people actually have that, and then they might have to see someone like me. But yeah, to tell you the truth, that you know having the kid who's a normal weight and things like that, that's become a vanishing breed, and we end up doing it a lot, and it is something that if you know what to look for example, if you're looking for fasting insulin, then you'll start to see that the fasting insulin is elevated in a lot of these kids, and then you can actually intervene before they start having a lot of issues. If you're looking at their fasting triglycerides, you'll actually see that they're starting to get into trouble, and a lot of these things are much easier to take care of when you catch them early.
Yes, absolutely. Like everything else that we do, right?
Right.
Um, this is a difficult question, um, but I get the feeling that number one is our lifestyles, and that probably includes a lack of meditation, religion, community, relationships. Two, diet, and three, lack of knowledge not only of the patients but on our community of physicians.
Mhm.
And four would be wrong-headed policies, such as you should drink 3 glasses of milk every day that's fortified with vitamin D and God only knows what else. And the first one should be with cereal that's fortified with vitamin D and vitamin C. Uh, that all come into play with this wave of metabolic problems that we're seeing in kids. Is there more, or what am I getting wrong?
Yeah, so so when you are listing off some of those things, yeah, I would echo that, right? Where I would say that normally when I see someone, for example, a mom who comes in and the kid is 8 years old, one of my big barriers is the food policies in school. So it's almost like I have this poor mom from some another country where they can't really afford to give him food, or if they do, the kid just goes to school and they get basically candy for breakfast and candy for lunch. And the unfortunately, we kind of think it's okay to give kids Fruit Loops for breakfast, but that is not healthy, right? A lot of times they think that their kid is not exercising enough, and in truth they're probably not. I mean, when I went to school, I had gym every day, and we had recess, and that was basically gym as well, and we were running around like anything. But we all know that, ounces are lost in the gym and pounds are lost in the kitchen, right? So it really has a lot to do with the kids eating foods that are basically unhealthy, but people are fooled into thinking that they're doing things in moderation, but there should be no moderation for unhealthy foods, right? Moderation is for healthy foods, right?
So we're talking about telling kids they should have a glass of orange juice, a sugary cereal as their breakfast every morning, right? Why does anybody need to drink orange juice? It's, bunch of sugar, right?
I don't.
I don't need it, but the
And
kids don't need it.
this is why I was very happy to do this podcast, because what I want to enlist is the pediatricians to kind of talk about this kind of stuff at younger visits. So when our kids are at 4 months, they get a video from us that talks about they should not be drinking juice, right? So we're starting at the very beginning when like the parents are the most impressionable, and then we start to work on them, right? And trying to make sure that they're like making sure that their kids are going to be eating healthy, but it's hard when they have to fight against the culture of unhealthy food.
I have a saying in the exam room, which is you've got control of your kids until they're 4.5. So if you don't buy the orange juice, you don't buy the sugary snacks, you don't buy the Doritos, potato chips into the pantry, they'll never ask for it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, once they start having friends and they go to the birthday party and they eat pizza and cake and, whatever soda they're going to get, well, they got to live a little bit. So it's okay once in a while. But, that you lose control of them. But in the beginning, it's all up to you because you are the only one that can go to the grocery store or order on Amazon. And if they don't see it in your house, they're not going to ask for it.
What about like soda and Gatorade and things like that? Kids love that stuff.
They don't need it.
I know they don't need it. That's what every kid that I have seen, they just drink soda nonstop.
Yeah, no, it's that's why, unfortunately, the fructose, which is probably one of the main reasons why we're in such big trouble, that actually activates a lot of the addictive parts of their brain, and they do go, like you say, crazy for it. And if we know that the fructose is addicting, then why are we giving it to them when they're younger and creating all these slaves to these unhealthy drinks, right? It is the thing that if we can protect them from getting these kinds of things, and I don't know if I would disempower the parents, because a lot of times this is our job. Our job is to train the parents, and then the parents go and talk to other people. And, like if the parent is a teacher, then they're not going to be giving kids cake pops every Friday because they had a long talk with me, right? So, it is the kind of thing that it has to come a little bit grassroots before all the people that make the laws understand that this is something that people are going to get behind and want to do, right? But we have to reach that tipping point among our population. And all these health things happen with pediatricians. I mean, seat belts, all these kinds of things, they all become laws, right? In the city, if they catch you without a helmet, they're going to take your bike. And that happened because pediatricians were telling all the kids, you got to wear a helmet. And then finally the parents all said, we got to have a law. And then it happened, right? So it's going to all happen with us, right? So if we have parties and we don't have soda, we don't do all this kind of stuff, we kind of set a good example, then yeah, the kids are going to do great. It's exactly like alcohol. I'll never forget one of the people who worked for us. Her kids were invited to only graduation parties where they were planning to serve alcohol to all these kids who are graduating. And while I was talking to her, she was kind of like, all of a sudden the light came in her eyes and she realized, Jim, I'm going to have the party. And that's what she did. She had a party. They did not serve any hard alcohol, and her kids were fine. Everything was fine. And that's the kind of stuff we need everybody to do, is kind of say, you know what, I value the health, and we're just going to do that. And the only way is to kind of try to convince the parents that this is something that they can change.
So we're going to go back a little bit. So one is lifestyle. Two is the nutrition. So cut out for example, is sugar-free Gatorade as harmful as regular Gatorade?
Yeah. So first of all, sugar-free on all those kind of things, they have chemicals, right? So, they approve these things, but it doesn't mean they approve them and they did studies on 5-year-old kids, right? So that's the first thing, right? That you're a part of the experiment when you give your kid one of these kind of sugar-free kind of things. The other thing is I like one of the things I tell my kids who come to see me because they're pre-diabetic is they've done studies, for example, with Coke and Diet Coke, right? Or maybe I shouldn't say the brand name, right? But and what they do is they actually let some people continue to drink Coke, and then they give some people Diet Coke. And what they see in the beginning, the Diet Coke people, they do a little bit better for the first 6 months, but then 2 years later, the Diet Coke people, they're in much bigger trouble than the people who, the adults, these were adults, who kept drinking regular Coke. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist. Now that we have all these diet things, it's not like the obesity epidemic went away. So we know that it's not helpful. And the exact reason nobody really understands, but it probably is something centrally acting that when you eat something sweet in your mouth, your brain is like, hey, how come I didn't get my drug? And it kind of puts you in this mode of looking for more sugar and carbohydrates, and it can get you into trouble.
And so, what do you do to stay hydrated? Because you need some electrolytes, especially, like the last few days out here in the East Coast when it's been 100 degrees with 80% humidity. You need some electrolytes. You can't just drink water to stay hydrated. What do you recommend that people?
So yeah, so I would disagree. You can 100% can drink water and stay hydrated. Now you do lose salt, so some people who are losing salt excessively, they might have to actually have something with electrolytes or make sure they're having salt tablets or things like that. Before they invented Gatorade, remember Gatorade was invented for the Florida Gators because they were working out in the Florida sun and they were losing excessive amount of salts. And initially Gatorade tasted terrible, right? So the guy who came up with Gatorade, even some of the football players they refused to drink it. They would just pour it on their head because they were like, this stuff tastes like piss, right? And then when the guys bought it, Pepsi bought it, they were like, yeah, no one's going to drink this, right? Because the Florida Gators, I think, won the national championship. So they were like, well, we'll add a lot of sugar to it. And this actually came to a head with one of the football players on the Minnesota Vikings, Corey Stringer, which it sounds like you've never heard of him, but he was a guy who passed away during training camp because he was drinking Gatorade. And Gatorade does not replace your electrolytes enough. And he went into arrhythmia and died. So there is a Corey Stringer Foundation. And nowadays, the football players do not drink Gatorade like they used to. They drink Pedialyte. Right?
They mix it half and half, but they won't acknowledge it because they have a sponsorship from Pedialyte.
Well, because Pedialyte tastes like piss, right?
Yeah, so Pedialyte's awful.
It's the kind of thing that they try to do something.
There's another product called Ceralite, which is from
there
rice.
Are things, and I have patients who have POTS, and we have them buy the pure electrolyte, but we try to get it without a lot of sugar and things like that.
Okay, so back to the problem, because there are people who cannot maintain hydration with just water, so they should look for some sort of electrolyte pack that they can take with low sugar.
So this all depends on the person, right? So again, before they knew all about the electrolytes, the guys would have salt tablets. And, if people want to drink Pedialyte, I mean, to tell you the truth, now they advertise Pedialyte on TV, and that would probably be the best thing. But how many kids, are 300 pounds and they're losing, because like some of these offensive linemen, they'll lose 20 pounds of weight in their workout, right? So
yes,
they're very different, right? And to tell you the truth, I don't think that's a smart idea for people to work out like that and lose 20 pounds of sweat. I think that's actually a little bit
harmful.
Stupidity, right?
Right. So, and they eat 2 or 3 chickens, 2 to 3 whole chickens a day because they got so much muscle. Then if they don't eat 3 chickens a day, they lose their muscle, almost overnight. It melts off of it. And then they stop playing, and then they die at 45 from heart disease because they never stop eating like they're working out. It's just also totally crazy.
So I don't have those guys as patients because I'm a pediatrician, right?
Yeah.
I have football players. I advise them to eat enough protein so they can build muscle mass, right? So that's maybe a different podcast.
Yeah. So that's a whole other conversation. And so obviously no sugary drinks. You probably can stay hydrated unless you're a very big person in a certain environment without having to take any other electrolytes. And if you're going to take electrolytes, Pedialyte would be the best, and just pinch your nose. Right?
Yeah, I mean, yesterday I went for a run outside. It's super hot in the Northeast right now, and I drank water. Yeah.
Okay. And so what else am I missing about what I need to be thinking in terms of weight management and more precisely metabolic management in kids? We talked about lifestyle, we talked about diet. Um, what else am I missing?
So, I mean, it's really 90% diet. I would say another 8% usually is, or 7% is usually sleep, where we have an epidemic of kids not sleeping. And when you're not sleeping, your body is not doing the normal metabolic kind of regeneration that it's supposed to. And I definitely have had some kids that, they're like, Dr. Reilly, I'm doing CrossFit, you know, the last time I ate a carb was like 3 months ago, and I'm still not losing weight. What's going on, right? And normally I would do the same thing, like I told you, history, physical. And unfortunately, if you're not sleeping, which that's usually the third one, is that those kids are usually, they're usually high achieving kind of people. They're sleeping only 4 or 5 hours, and your body is going to release stress hormones. And just like, when you're an intensivist, you can make anybody gain weight by giving them enough steroids. If your body gives you enough steroids, your idea of losing weight is not going to happen.
Wow, that's very interesting. I had no idea about that. Um, when you encounter one of these kids, either because they have anxiety or they're hyperachieving and they're not sleeping well, or just bad habits, um, other than melatonin, is there another medication you might use or recommend for them to sleep?
Well, I mean, first it's education, right? So this is always, so again, like what you're saying is kind of like a very doctor thing to say. And I would try to get people to get out of this kind of mindset, because the cure is not usually a pill. The cure is getting the person to understand that health is the most important thing, right? But if you have someone that you've tried to work with them, like talk about their health and trying to see, because a lot of times, for example, with sleep, the kids will be high achieving. So they'll say, no, you don't understand. Like, I never went to medical school, right? You don't understand. I have to work this hard. And, and usually if I can convince them that, then they don't need things like melatonin. But yeah, if I have someone, for example, the attention deficit people, they're not good at listening. So if I have that, then there are things that we can try, but that would be a very kind of individual kind of basis. But recently, I just had a kid who does have attention deficit. He didn't come to see me for weight, but we gave him some a blood pressure type medicine that usually helps to make kids tired, and it would also
Some
help him with his
clonidine.
attention deficit. Yeah,
Clonidine. Did,
but that's
did,
but
but
usually,
that's rare.
that's not a common kind of thing, because I'm not going to tell the kid who's going to bed at 12 and waking up at 6 and taking a 2-hour nap to try to, don't get rid of that. Usually what we're going to try to do is say, well, do you have to take a 2-hour nap? Can you set your alarm clock and sleep for an hour and a half? Can you go to bed at half an hour early? I mean, what are you doing for that half an hour, right? And if we can get them to be more healthier, no, I mean, that actually is one of the things that I've seen. Just, I just saw a guy that he was in big trouble. He was admitted at a psychiatric hospital. They gave him multiple medicines. Nothing was working. He didn't even see me. He just Googled what should he do, and he just figured it out for himself. He's like, I should eat right, mostly meat, vegetables, and some fruit. I should exercise every day, and I need to sleep 8 hours. And he stopped all his medicines. All his suicidal thoughts went away. The kid was perfect, and I had nothing to do with it. I was so upset because I was like, I could have told you everything, but it's the kind of thing that he healed himself. And I was just like, man, you're like my hero, right?
So, so let me ask you again. So you would recommend that uh, middle school and up till 70s get 8 hours of sleep a night?
So they've looked at this. So I give people very concrete recommendations. So what is your normal bedtime when you're in elementary school? It's usually around 8 o'clock, right? Because the guys have to wake up at 7, right? When you're in middle school, your normal bedtime is supposed to be around 9, because you're supposed to sleep 10 hours. And when you're in high school, you're supposed to sleep 8 or 9 hours. So normally they go to bed around 10, because they're usually having to wake up at 6, right? But it depends. If you're a swimmer and you have to be in the pool at 5:30, those guys have to be going to bed much earlier, right? But it's, the problem is that a lot of times their parents are the same way. They're trying to squeeze everything in their life into the small amount of time that they have. And so they always think that sleep is a like to have instead of a must have, right? And as we've learned in the last 10 years about the lymphatic system of the brain, we realize that this is something that's super important. That's how your brain gets rid of its waste while you're asleep. And it's unfortunately not a pump. It's something that the waste products just slowly diffuse into the CSF. And if you're eating right before you go to sleep, the lymphatic system is not going to do its job. If you're not sleeping enough, you don't have enough time for the lymphatic system to do its job. And it really has caused a lot of this epidemic. Yeah.
And also you have to silence your electronic devices.
Oh yeah, the kids are up with the devices all night long. They get notifications. They can't let it go. If it beeps, they have to listen to it. They have to look at it. They get these group chats from their friends.
It's not.
Jim, everything you do sounds to be very complicated and time consuming and draining. How do you do it? How do we do it?
He loves it. He's very passionate about it.
Well, a general pediatrician by himself can't
do
that all. Because there's still some ear infections to see, some checkups to see, some asthma to see.
So I would kind of say that a little bit different, right? Because that's a thing like you see people say all the time, right? I'm too busy to handle all these patients I have. And you know what? You just hire someone else, right? So that's actually what we've done, right? I mean, George is super great, right? Because, he's like, oh, I'm going to see these obesity people and I'm going to have less time. And he's like, knock yourself out. Right? So, and then we just hire people to kind of fill those spots.
Yeah. So let's talk. I understand the last thing you want to do is put a child on medication, but there are some times where they're doing everything they're supposed to do and they get stuck. So if their insulin is really high in the morning, before you go on medication, what could they do to decrease that or improve that if it's not genetic?
So it's very interesting with the insulin, right? Because what happens is first there's a damage to your fat cells, right? So this is part of the stuff that we never learned, right? And what happens is then after the fat cells and all these things start getting into trouble, people get what we call insulin resistant, which I see that all the time when I do a test where I give the kids sugar to drink and I see their fasting sugar and fasting insulin. And then 2 hours later, I look at their insulin, and some of these kids, their insulin is super high after 2 hours of having some sugar to drink, right? And so this is kind of like what happens is they eat breakfast, right? And let's say their breakfast is a very sugary meal. And insulin is the master switch that allows us to lose fat. What happens is that they eat a breakfast. Let's say they're going to school and they're having an apple cinnamon bar, right? All these kind of things that are like just candy. Their insulin goes up and then it goes down. But instead of it goes up and goes down pretty quickly. For them, it goes up and it stays up until it's lunchtime. And then at lunchtime, all the school food is basically sugar or junk. And then it never goes back to the way it was before, and it goes up. And then if they're at dinner, they're grabbing something quick because they're doing soccer or they're doing whatever, they grab some pizza. Now the sugar is going to go up, the insulin is going to go up again. And then their insulin is going to be high the whole time when they're sleeping. So, and when your insulin is high while you're sleeping, you're not going to be in balance, right? Because the way that God designed us is sort of like eat the food during the day and then burn the calories at night, almost like a hybrid car. Now they're kind of having the insulin high. You're getting a signal to your body, do not burn this food, go into kind of a low metabolic state, and they're going to try not to burn their calories that they've accumulated during the day. And this happens when your insulin is elevated, right? And that's why the fasting insulin is so important, because it kind of tells us, yes, this is exactly what's going on in your body. So if you can kind of structure a kid's day where they're not getting that huge insulin spike first thing in the morning, and if their dinner is not a huge insulin spike, and we're saving this exposure to the things that raise your insulin for more like the middle of the day.
So how do you do that practically? So breakfast should be some eggs.
So yeah,
dinner should be heavy on on protein, whether
So
it's
they've looked
fish?
at that. Yeah. So if you have, it's usually what raises your insulin the most is the combination of fat and carbs. So like a donut, right? So that raises it a lot. If you just had plain bread, it would raise it your insulin like this. But if you had eggs with some avocado and whatever, that doesn't raise your insulin a whole lot. And then you have an opportunity for your insulin to go down, down, down during the day until you eat
And
again.
dinner
But
time, what kind of protein? Does it matter?
so again, like trying to have the healthiest protein you can, but that's like a barrier for some people, right? So a lot of times it's just the cheapest kind of protein they can have. But when I see an older kid, a lot of times they're also nutrition deficient, which we didn't talk about as a barrier to weight loss. But we have an epidemic of kids who are nutritionally deficient because they're eating foods that have no nutrition, right? So I usually try to see if I can get them to have like half their plate some kind of protein, the other half some kind of vegetable, right? So if they could have like chicken with broccoli and carrots, that would be great, right? And that would actually provide them all the nutrition they need, but it also wouldn't raise their insulin while they're sleeping.
And then you said something that was interesting. You said animal protein. So you're not against beef or poultry or what is this? Pork chops, or it's just protein is protein. It's not.
So even the most unhealthy protein has more nutrition than a lot of the other stuff the kids are going to eat, right? Now, like I said before, unfortunately, the food producers don't really care about health. So when you buy an animal, for example, that started out grass fed and then was finished corn fed, what ends up happening is because the animal's only eating corn, they get more and more what I call dilute, right? Where they're more and more watery their blood. They're having less and less vitamins in their blood. And for example, the omega-3 fatty acids go way down, almost down to zero. And that's not as healthy. So that's why the academy recommends kids to have fish twice a week, so that way they can get a source of omega-3 fatty acids, right? But yeah, no, it's especially I'm dealing with a lot of times with single moms and things like that. Any kind
You
of
can't do it.
animal protein they can get is going to be great. It'll be a good source of iron and things like that.
Okay. And then I would imagine there's some patients that even though they're trying to do what you just told them, their insulin still remains high, and you have to go to medications. Um, so, what medications are being used today to help children with this metabolic disorders and on obesity? Uh, Metformin is being studied a lot in adults. Is that something that has a place in this management in your practice?
Yeah, so normally I tend to have a rule where I'm not usually crazy about giving kids metformin right away, right? But it is approved for littler kids, and I usually think that when you're seeing someone, if your kind of first thing is to think about medicines, you're kind of missing the point, because what is our goal? Is our goal to put someone on metformin, and then are they going to come to see me 20 years later still taking metformin? So the value of metformin for me is usually to kind of make the kid more insulin sensitive. So whatever changes they have made, um, it kind of makes it more effective. And then it also provides the engagement, because I tell them they have to come back and see me for more metformin, and then I can kind of work on them a little bit.
And then some of these children that do have a food addiction, right? And there's some medications that you can use that at the level of the brain stop the addiction. What would be your to go to medicine in that case?
So yeah, so like there is a medicine, for example, that we use for kids who have migraines even as young as 8 years old, called topiramate, and it does actually have a good effect in kids to make them less likely to crave sugar, and allows them to kind of quit these kind of things. So, recently I had a girl who was drinking soda every day, and she was kind of unhappy with the topiramate, because she was like, I don't understand. I don't get the same pleasurable response from drinking my soda. And it made her kind of not drink soda. So she was kind of almost like wanting to stop the medicine because she wasn't getting her usual fix. Right. But to tell you the truth, that's
Rare.
that's 1%, 0.5%, hardly any of a percent. Because I mean, when someone wants to start something like this in their office, what I would say is start with the easy people, not with the people who are super hard, right? You can leave them for guys like me, right? But it is the kind of thing that if we're going to beat the obesity epidemic, we have to start at the beginning, right? We have to start when they're little. And that's what I would say. I would say that if someone is feeling like they're inspired and they want to do some of this kind of stuff, you could start with short visits, 15 to 30 minutes for kids who are 2 years old. Just say, look, I just saw someone, for example, yesterday, the kid is obviously heavy, not doing so well. I said, look, I want you to come back and see me in 3 months, because it was the 2.5-year visit. And I want to talk about some of these things if you're willing, right? Because this is always the thing. Like sometimes the parents are not willing, they're not ready, sometimes they're living in a shelter, they have other things that they have to do in life, right? So but that's how you start, right? You can kind of just tell them and just go over, just make notes, because it's hard to remember, and then just say, what kind of things are you doing, what do you think you can change now? The motivational part of it is the key. So that way it's always a positive experience.
So we'll get back to that in just a second. I have just one more question about medications. I understand you're not a big fan of them and why you're not a big fan of them. But you had mentioned sometimes you throw in the spironolactone with metformin and a third thing. When do you do that?
So like just yesterday, I saw that girl who had lost a ton of weight, which, this is a thing, right? So she had been trying a long time. And for some reason, that one of the things that we find is that low doses of different kinds of medicines tend to have a better result than a high dose of one of the medicines. So spironolactone helps to lower the testosterone, and her testosterone level was 57, and she's only I think 14 or 15. So that's way too high for a little kid like that. So spironolactone, as you may be aware, like the dermatologist will give it to kids to kind of control their acne, and they're doing it because they're trying to control their hormones. So why can't we use it to try to help a kid become more metabolically healthy? Acarbose is a medicine that I feel like is underutilized. It blocks the absorption of these simple carbohydrates. It's a competitive kind of inhibitor. So it blocks some of the sugar that she was eating. So that way she doesn't get the same kind of effect from eating sugar. And then the metformin, insulin sensitizer. So the work that she's been doing, especially for her, that she's not really a big exercising kind of woman, metformin seems to be perfect for those kind of people. And that kind of trio seems to work actually very nicely for a lot of people who they're kind of doing it, but they're sort of not really seeing the results, so they're not getting the inspiration. And it actually seems to help very nicely. But again, this is usually after I had already done my evaluation. I saw all the different metabolic challenges that she had.
Great. And then one last question about therapeutics, and then I want to know how you started this program. But what's your thinking about LDL cholesterol and the new guidelines for adults to get them as close to 50 as possible?
Yeah, so this, I don't know if this is like part of the scope for most pediatricians, because we're not going to get kids down to LDL 50, and part of it is because they're going to be giving biologics to lower someone's cholesterol, and there was a study that did show that they were actually able to help with some of the survivability. But again, like some of these interventions are very heavy duty interventions, and these medicines are like more than $10,000. And we are not going to survive as a nation if our plan is to spend thousands of dollars on people, right? Like I said, I very rarely need these interventions, and they're really designed for people who can't make any other nutritional interventions. And I do see that in the different societies, they're moving more toward changing the nutrition, because really a lot of the problems that we see are related to the inflammation that's happening in the body. Now, this is starting to become a real drill down in adult medicine kind of stuff, which I don't know if pediatricians really need to know. But yeah, usually it's the kind of thing that if we can change someone's diet and things like that, I'm not worrying too much about LDL. And in fact, like some of the studies they see is some of the people who maintain their cognitive faculties when they're older, they were guys who actually had higher LDL. So it's not just LDL, it's LDL in the context of someone who has a poor diet, right?
Okay.
And so it's like everything else. If you're trying to eat a poor diet and out medicine your way to a healthy life, that's expensive, and I don't think it really works.
Is there a point though when the LDL is above something that you either send them to cardiologist, you decide you need to start a statin if you've already tried diet and they're not improving?
So it's natural for some people to have high LDLs. And so again, this is getting a little bit in the weeds. So I'm not sure if people are so interested in it. But when there's something called ApoE4, right? I'm not sure if you're aware, but it's when people have ApoE4 and they're homozygous for this, they actually will get much more problems with high LDL cholesterol and Alzheimer's. So this is actually a thing that I struggle with whether or not I should test people, because it greatly increases your chance to have Alzheimer's disease later in life. And it's associated with all these kind of lipid abnormalities, right? And we do know that probably people would do better if we kind of try to help them with some of these kinds of things. But it also is associated with higher intelligence. So when they look at people who go to college, they have these kinds of things. It's also associated with a lot of other positive kind of things. But when you're an ApoE4 person, for example, and you're eating a Western kind of diet, even, it's like a lot of things that God does. He gives with one hand, but he takes away with the other. So it's the kind of thing, it is like the golden ticket. You're much more likely to be having all your faculties later in life, only if you obey the law. And the law is that you eat mostly meat, vegetable, and fruit. When you eat a crappy diet, then yeah, you're more likely to need all these kind of heavy duty interventions.
So,
but
this ApoE4, I've never heard of it before. Is it a simple blood test?
It's a simple blood test, but the insurance companies all know this. So once you do this test and you come back homozygous for it, you will find it extremely hard to get long-term care insurance, because we know that right now 9% of people will go on to become having Alzheimer's. But for people who are homozygous for this abnormality, it could be upwards of 50%, right?
Oh,
wow. So it is like a difficult kind of thing. But again, you don't really need to know if you eat a healthy diet.
Okay. But again, I'm going to circle back. Is there a point like, the kid's LDL-C is 180 and they're 16 years old, and they supposedly try diet and exercise because they're telling you that they have, but you're not living with them at home. So, is there a point where you would say, well, I need to start treating this?
So that this is when you have to refer them to someone like me, right? So,
okay.
Because I would do LDL subclasses, which again, this is all very lipidologist kind of stuff. But if I saw that they had a pattern A, I would say that I wouldn't be too worried about them. If they had pattern B, I would be much more likely to give them metformin than anything else.
Okay.
It really, when you're dealing with kids, the loss of cognition that people see with statins, with the increased risk of becoming pre-diabetic, all these things all play into it, right?
Okay.
So there's definitely it's not so simple like the drug reps say.
Make it simple for me. I'm seeing 25 patients today. 3 of them have BMIs over 95%. I happen to screen the 3 of them. One of them has an LDL of 100 and what, and I send them to you.
So if they have an LDL above 190, then I usually would do something.
Okay.
But I wouldn't necessarily put them on medicine. To tell you the truth, almost always I change their diet and their LDL becomes low.
Okay. I'm just thinking about
when they say that they've tried.
When should it trigger to me an obese male, 95th percentile BMI, cholesterol's over, LDL-C is over 180. That's when I refer.
Yeah, so I wouldn't. I would usually change their diet. They usually would say they've changed their diet, and then if you took their history, again, history, physical, diagnosis, because when I did my lipidology thing, they tried to convince everyone that once you had over 190, that you had a genetic abnormality. But almost every single person I've ever changed their diet, except for maybe like 2, their LDL went down, right?
Okay.
So it is the kind of thing that it's usually they're changing their diet, but they're not doing what we were talking about. They're like, oh no, Dr. Reilly, I'm having Honey Nut Cheerios every day for breakfast with my orange juice. I'm having, whole wheat bagels, and for dinner I'm eating whatever whole wheat pasta, kind of stuff, and gluten-free pizza, or and that's a high cholesterol person's diet, right? So that's crap.
Okay. Now let's talk about how you've already alluded to a little bit. So you do a 15-minute consult to begin with when somebody's having metabolic problems?
So normally when I see someone, it's 30 minutes.
Okay.
But to tell you the truth, their first consult is like 3 minutes, right? Because if I'm seeing them for a sore throat and they're obviously struggling, like I see signs of acanthosis nigricans or something like that, I will usually take care of their sore throat, and I say, when I check you, I see signs that you're starting to be metabolically unhealthy. If you're interested, I have visits like this. I can't do this today, but if you're willing to come back, I think I can help you, and I can kind of help you to be more healthy. But I'm going to order this test, and I would encourage you to go for the blood test when you're feeling better, and then come to see me.
And what's the test that you order?
So again, if they have acanthosis nigricans, usually they're going to need a fasting insulin, and they're going to need a hemoglobin A1C. But if it's a kid, for example, they're 13 and they have acanthosis nigricans, it's going to be a fasting insulin, a CBC, an SME20, thyroid tests, a lipid panel with triglycerides, vitamin D.
And then you have them come back for a 30-minute initial consultation.
But
and then yes,
before we go into that, Jim, from the person that's sending these patients there, what I found was we find that 3-minute visit, whatever, you find them there in their checkups. It's very simple. You get the
same thing,
BMI, you order the blood work. You can divert them to Dr. Reilly, and he's on the receiving end of it. And people tend to accept that a little bit better, as one physician is saying, you have a problem, we'll do some, eat more, eat less, run more kind of story until they see you. We order some blood work. But I think an important thing that happened in our practice is once we started implementing the review of the laboratory tests, because we started doing that, it used to be, you order blood work, you call them up on the phone, oh, you got a little bit of elevated cholesterol, don't go to McDonald's so much, have a nice day. The doctors would complain because there's a lot of time was spent on the phone. I don't have the time, I can't deal with it. So we implemented this with telemedicine, where we would go over, have dedicated slots to review the laboratory tests. And you know what? Everybody has some kind of a problem. So you have a medical diagnosis. You have time to review the test in a sane way without rushing. Find a problem, plant the seed that they may have a medical condition, and it would be best to dedicate some time to see one person that actually deals with this very well, and you refer them out to Dr. Reilly. That seems to work since we started doing that.
The other thing we did is, because in the beginning, not all the doctors would buy in, right? Mm-hmm. So we would actually every week go through the computer and pick out all the kids who are 95th percentile. And like if they went for a physical and nobody ordered labs, I would order labs, and we would kind of offer them a trip to see the doctor, to talk about their nutrition. And then, not everybody wants that. It's like a lot of things in life. It's like a third are kind of willing, a third are kind of, if you catch them in the teachable moment, you can grab them, and a third, they're just not interested, right? Which is, that's great. I don't want to waste my time on that third, right? Because I could talk, and they're not going to listen, right? The teachable moment is like when I see them and they see that I'm earnest and I want to help them. And then the other third are they just need us to kind of reach out to them. And that's kind of like why I'm trying to encourage pediatricians to do this, because if we can get a third of the kids to just be eating more natural kind of healthy foods, we'll be better off as a nation.
Absolutely. And so after the first, we screen them, we order some labs, we send them to initial consultation with someone within the practice that is passionate and knowledgeable about this. We start with diet, and then you see them in how many months after that first intervention?
Depends on the kid and what's going on. A lot of times that's, or I shouldn't say a lot of times, all the time, that's how I end the visit. So that way it's a signal to them that it's the end, right? So I'll say, look, we've talked a lot of things today, right? If you have certain medical problems, you have to come back and see me in a month, right? Or 6 weeks or whatever. And I'll tell them, look, this is what I want to do. So for example, my kids who had liver problems, they're
Hello.
Oh, we lost Dr. Reilly.
It froze up. He's fascinating, man.
Yeah.
Super smart.
Well, when he comes back, I can tell you how it works out. I mean, there's many parts of this program that are very difficult to do, because you'll have some doctors that say, well, he's spending so much time, who's going to see all the sick visits, who's going to do all the checkups. You have to allocate certain parts of the day. He probably could do full-time obesity medicine, but he's a general pediatrician, so he wants to do general pediatrics. He's Doc Baker. Doc Baker is back. But we spread it around in the office, and there's people like me that'll do the urgent care visits, the checkup visits, find the chronic care problems, send it over to Dr. Reilly, the ADHD stuff, and we move them around. So it's not like one person that does everything. So that's how it generates finance, because if it doesn't generate income, there's no point in doing it. So, but the truth of the matter is, since we started giving Prevnar vaccines, there's no more ear infections. There are not enough ear infections, so we could either reduce the amount of visits we have in the office, which will subsequently reduce the amount of nurses that you have, medical assistants that you have, and doctors that you have, or you could increase the staff and develop programs. He likes doing it. Some other doctors like doing it. So and that's how we make it, sustainable. And I think the most important piece of the program is this chronic care program. When you go to negotiate with insurance carriers, that's another thing that you do different than your regular doc-in-the-box office. We do chronic care medicine. We do pediatric obesity. We help, and we will reduce expenditure in the insurance world over time. So treat us well.
Yeah.
Dr. Reilly, welcome back.
Welcome back.
I don't know what happened. Sorry.
That's all right.
Okay, we kept it going.
So then your follow-up visits are 15-minute visits, and depends on what the kid's got going on, how often you see them.
It depends, right? So normally my visits are always 30 minutes, right? Because a lot of times I'm kind of having them come back and see me, for different kinds of things. If they're for just plain medicine, then they can be short like that, right? If you're seeing a littler kid, you can be short like that, right? Where you're just checking the weight and things like that. And, because there's not a lot of history physical diagnosis when the kid is 2 years old and the mom tells you that the kid is having 4 sugary drinks a day, right? You're just giving them some accountability when you're kind of checking them, and then you're giving them you are a good mom, you've done this kind of stuff well, right? Kind of talk, which that has a lot of power for that kind of stuff to get it from the pediatrician, right? Because they're not getting it from a lot of other people. And if they could see their kid get healthier in front of them, that's great, right? So yeah. So, I mean, like a lot of times people try to make all these things cookie cutter, and unfortunately it's not so that way. But I would say that I also get a lot of more complicated people. So it's always going to be at least half an hour for me.
And then how much of your day is set aside for these consults? 50%, 30%?
Depends on the day, right? Like George said, it's the kind of thing that some of the guys have no time set aside. Some of the guys have more time. It depends on the day, depends on what's going on, depends on a lot of things.
Okay. Yeah, that's the culture of the office. We work together. So if he's busy doing his consults, the rest of us pick up. And we don't look at, well, I saw 100 patients and you saw only 40.
Right. Because
we don't look at that.
Every patient isn't the same.
Yeah, not every patient's the same.
And you can generate enough revenue to sustain this business model in a pediatric practice, right?
Yes.
So you're helping the world, you're helping the kids, which is why we went into this, but you can still keep the lights on and pay the office staff and take some money home.
Well, it's all about operations, work plans, and efficiencies. If you're just going to do it the old ways, it's not going to work. You have to have proper templates created in the EHR so you don't type away all day long. You have to have your staff, they know how to prepare the patient and do what you need to do, and the follow-ups, and the other doctors need to have a buy-in on what to do with the patient, how to get them to the program, and so forth. So it's a team.
Good. Can you already said this, but can a solo practitioner do this?
I would think so. It's the kind of thing now, it depends. If you're a solo practitioner and you're busting at the seams seeing ear infections, they would probably say, well, I don't know if I can add more time. And, if you're dying, then those are the guys that get burnt out. And I would say that you would get a lot more enjoyability from your practice when you can hire perhaps an extra person and pay for that extra person with some of these kind of visits, because you'll be able to actually cure people. It's crazy, because I think that's one of the things that happens to people is they feel like they're just kind of doing the same thing every day. They're kind of just treading water, just trying to survive. But if you can do these kinds of things and actually make people healthier, I mean, that's really why we became pediatricians, so we can make a difference, right? This is something that can make a difference. And I think that if we're too busy, that's kind of a losing business model, right? If you owned a bakery and you're like, wow, I don't know, I'm too busy in my bakery to make this thing that everybody else needs, you wouldn't say that. You'd be like, dang, I got to open another bakery, right? So this is the problem with pediatricians. They suck as business people. And it's the kind of thing that it's kind of a nonsense statement to me that we have an epidemic of unhealthy people. There are definitely enough unhealthy people, right? Yep. We just have to kind of not listen to these kind of organizations that tell us that it's too complicated for us to do, and just do it, right? And you'll see, you'll get a lot of satisfaction, and your bank account will be happier too.
Yeah. And then I forgot to ask you about this one, but it's all the same thing. I think mental illness, metabolic disease, they're all related. You're not living a good lifestyle. You're not eating well. You're not getting enough sleep. But most people don't want to do that. Is there a point where, when you have a kid on an SSRI and they're gaining weight, is there a point where you will add a medication, or do you continue to stress healthy lifestyle, good diet, good sleep before you do that?
Yeah. So yeah, it depends who you see, right? So when someone makes the mistake of seeing me, again, the first thing I do is history, physical, and diagnosis, right? Because a lot of times they're on an SSRI, but the psychiatrists actively discourage you from looking for the reason for depression. So if the kid has no iron and you put them on SSRI, that's why you need to add on an Effexor or something like that, right? Because they're in big trouble. If the kid is not sleeping, I don't care what kind of stuff you're doing for them, for their anxiety is not going to get better, right? So yeah, no, if anything, when someone kind of comes to see me for weight loss, I'm attacking the whole thing, right? I'm kind of saying, look, you come to see me, you want to lose weight, I can help you with that. But how about you become healthier so you don't have to take medicines? And yeah, I mean, I can help them, certainly, like, if they're put on Risperdal, and, everybody kind of knows that this makes you more insulin resistant. So it's a no-brainer to put them on metformin for something like that. But, how many kids that they're able to stop all these kinds of things just by becoming healthier, right? Just like that kid that I was telling you, that it's not an every once in a while kind of thing. This is a thing, right? When, I don't know how old you are, but when I started, we didn't have girls who were going to their sweet 16 taking Prozac. And now it just seems like it happens all the time. It doesn't have to be this way. It wasn't this way. And if we want it to be different in the future, we have to actually become healthier. And that's the only way it's going to happen.
Could it be because
Absolutely.
of all the specialties in the world, Jim? I mean, because people get sent to places and those people see a thing happening and they attack that thing, but nobody looks at the whole body or the general approach to everything. Are we missing that?
I blame myself too, because that's exactly when we were trained, right? Because we were trained together, right?
Yeah.
And that's how they told us, right? If you have this, then you do this, right? If you have that, you take this medicine, right? And that's what I mean. Is like it went down a hole, because as I started studying this, I just realized that, yeah, no, it's all this kind of stuff. Even before us, when we became pediatricians, the kids were much healthier, right? And instead of going after the root causes of why the kids are getting healthier, we're trying to always getting stuck putting band-aids on stuff, right? But if we can kind of get rid of the cause of why all these guys are getting so sick, and yeah, and unfortunately, you're right. The specialists are like a barrier, right? Because when they see a specialist and they see I'm changing the diet, they're like, yeah, whatever, right? Or just that happened to me yesterday. What happened? Oh, the kid has kidney problems, and they put him on a low protein diet. So of course, the kid is low in everything that we find in proteins, right? And unfortunately, the specialist didn't really know anything about this kind of stuff. And they said, well, I don't know, it seems like it's okay, you don't have to worry about it. But of course you have to worry about it if you're low in all these things. And it is like a thing. Luckily, the parents have known me since the kid was a baby, so they trust me. So they're like, well, it's the kind of thing, I'll just do what Dr. Reilly says if you're saying it's not going to be bad for my kidney problems.
So back to relationships, which are important.
And unfortunately, we were trained the wrong way, right? We came up at a time where infectious disease was all that pediatrics is all about.
Right.
And
now you got to change.
And the ethos was, if you want to be a doctor, you can go 36 hours without sleep. And what's your diet? Diet Coke, coffee, donuts, whatever was left in the conference room, because you were just tired and hungry. You would eat 2 donuts and 2 cups of coffee and then start your rounds. And well, if you can't do that, son, then well, you're not going to be able to survive when a kid's sick in front of you at 2 a.m.
Yep.
Right. That was the ethos. And it was the wrong way to train us, but it's the way we got trained. This has been a fascinating talk.
I think we have to have Dr. Reilly back one day.
Yeah, I hope you come back and we dig in deeper, because you keep alluding to, I don't know if pediatricians are interested in this. I think we are interested 2 ways. One is we want to improve the care our kids get, but also a lot of us struggle with these same issues. How do you maintain balance? How do you maintain a healthy diet? How do you exercise? How do you meditate? How do you get enough sleep at night? And so all the points that you have brought up today are very educational and insightful. And I really thank you, because it not only helps inform me as when I'm practicing, but what to do about my own self and to take care of myself, because that's also important.
Yep. Thanks, Dr. Reilly.
All right. Nope. I'll be very happy to come back, I have to say.
I know where you work. All right. Have a good day.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.